Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. AEW Dynamite review for September 14th, 2022. I've got a couple of things that I want to talk about, so I'm going to go through it here. And I did something that I usually don't do, I'll be honest. It's one of those things where we've been kind of a work in progress as far as how we're going to do the channel. But on this episode, I decided to sit down, watch the episode, and take a couple of notes here myself, just to kind of get some thoughts as it was happening. So I'm going to share some of those with you, share some general thoughts on the whole thing, and then we'll go from there. Now, real quick, just off the top, this episode, honestly, for me, just off the top, I want to say that this episode for me was one that I was very closely eyeing because while last week's episode was certainly anticipated from the perspective of I wanted to see, like everybody else, what came out of All Out, what came out of the All Out medium scrum, the CM Punk thing, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, the Elite thing, and obviously the suspensions, everything that has come about as a result of it. That's all interesting. That's all intriguing. But realistically, this was the episode that I was genuinely curious about because, and I'll tell you why right off the top before I get into the rest of the episode, I was curious about this particular episode because last week's episode felt like obviously you're calling it audible, you're trying to make certain things work, you're trying to make certain things fit. You did touch on certain elements of it, and I'll talk about that a little bit tonight in kind of the review of this episode. And you basically tried to reset a couple of different things, but your approach to it left you in a certain position where the follow-up was critically important. And I did get a comment on a previous video, and I want to kind of share it with you. And, you know, I'll address this specific comment in the specific video, but when you make comments on videos, I certainly appreciate it and also want to respond to it. One of the points made on there, I want to specifically focus in on a couple of points of it, was that, you know, CM Punk did nothing wrong with the exception of talking over Tony. And like I said, I'll address these comments as they come in, and I'll respond directly to the comment as well. Vets are defending Punk, and nobodies and no nothing marks are defending the Bucks and Page. If it's a work, it's masterful. Now, I want to focus on two things. First one, I've heard a lot of the different approaches to it, as far as veterans defending Punk, and nobodies and no nothing marks defending the Bucks and Page. I'm defending neither. I think everybody did a lot of things wrong. And I did outline some of it in the previous videos, so I kind of want to touch on that. But also, the last sentence. If it's a work, it's masterful. At this point, I think we're comfortable that it's not a work. Does that mean you couldn't turn it into one? Absolutely. You could turn it into one tomorrow if you really wanted to, and it could get everybody on the same page. However, the reason why I believe it's not a work, and the reason why I believe it would be foolish if it was, is that the payoff was minuscule. The payoff was pathetic. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I just want to objectively state this. The payoff was terrible because if the idea here was that this was a work, this was a plan and all this stuff, okay, great. What did you get out of it? You got a bunch of buzz coming out of All Out. You got a bunch of questions going like, oh my God, what's going to happen leading into the Dynamite after that? Well, you gave the appropriate response, but you also gave kind of a muted response. But it was appropriate, honestly. I think the Jon Moxley promo was really good coming off of that. I think the setup with MJF about that was a great audible to call. Like I said, I believe at this point that it wasn't a work. I believe that it was straight up, this is what happened, and now we're reacting to it and we're trying to make it work. I think Jon Moxley did a tremendous job. I think MJF did a tremendous job, you know, audibling on the fly. And I think they were able to create a potentially compelling matchup, you know, at least alluding to it. And again, they'll touch on it this week, and I'll cover that in the review in a moment. But the point is, I think they made chicken salad out of chicken shit, literally and figuratively. And the reason why I say I don't believe it's a work, because if it was, then it's one of the most poorly conceived, poorly thought out, and poorly executed works in all of time. Because if you go back and look at what the results were as far as the ratings are concerned, coming out of All Out, you had this buzz, not a positive buzz, but like a negative buzz, like what the hell is going on with AEW? Has Tony Khan lost control? All these questions were coming out of All Out. And leading into the episode of Dynamite last week, you were questioning like, okay, so what's going to happen? And then obviously they alluded to they're going to resolve the title situation, and they took care of it right off the top. Jon Moxley came out and cut the promo right off the top, and then you kind of moved on with the rest of the show. That isn't to say you didn't do some really good things, and I covered it in last week's review, but the point is that with all that potential intrigue, you got, I think, 15 or 20,000 additional viewers. Total. This, like, if that was the intention, this would be like being a musician and selling out for like another 100 album sales. What's the point? the whole idea of selling out then is to, double or triple your sales. Or in the case of like AEW Dynamite, you want to get like 15 or 20% more viewers, eyeballs on the product as a result. You want 1.2 million, 1.3 million tuning in going, what the hell's going on? I got to tune in and watch. 15 or 20,000 means that it barely moved the needle. Now, it's not all bad news, to be 100% transparent with you. It's not all bad news, because in reality, what happened as a result of that is that you did kind of tread water, actually, which on honesty, seeing what the AEW ratings do traditionally right now with the way that the product is structured, is that just having 3 consecutive weeks of 1 million plus viewers is actually pretty good. And again, I say this as a person who enjoys and appreciates the AEW product. I don't talk about the WWE product because I don't enjoy it and I don't watch it. So I'm going to predominantly talk about AEW. That's kind of where the focus is going to be. But as a result of that, it means that I'm going to focus on what they're doing. And reality is, right now, they've figured out that right now their audience is about 800, 900,000 to 1 million viewers. That's kind of their baseline audience, give or take a couple of thousand. And with all this intrigue coming into this episode last week, they basically maintained and gained a little bit from the previous week, but not as much as 2 weeks prior. So in reality, if this was a work, it didn't really accomplish anything at all. So that's why I mean, like, if it was poorly conceived and poorly structured and poorly executed. Let's put it that way. Now, leading into this week was more interesting to me, like I said. And the reason why I said it was more interesting to me is because this is the week after. Now you don't have the benefit of coming off of All Out. Now you don't have the benefit of necessarily getting that curiosity factor in it. You actually are going to have to now, okay, so now you've made a decision. You're going to have a title tournament. You made a decision. You're going to have a couple of people do a couple of things and make some promos and allude to certain of these things. How are you going to follow it up? What is the follow-up to what you did last week? And I'm not counting Rampage, because obviously the way that they've structured this company and the way that it is, because it's pre-recorded predominantly, it means that Rampage is almost like a skip. So in reality, you've got 2 hours of real television, like live television, to be able to establish what you're doing. So this week was critical. And this week's rating is going to be interesting to me. If I was to make a prediction off the top, I'm going to say this episode of Dynamite was solid. There were elements I liked and elements I didn't like. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was back in the 900,000s, or maybe even a little bit below. It drops. My expectation, my prediction is that the ratings drop, even though you had some good matches leading into that you were promoting to. So I guess it's a good test of the AEW audience to find out what they really care about, because you knew going in that you had Jon Moxley having a title eliminator match versus Sami Gabara, which was going to be a solid match. And then, you had a Chris Jericho versus Bryan Danielson match, which should be solid as well. So you already had 2 matches already figured out leading into this show that have consequence, that have significance. And then how you structure the rest of the show should go from there. So even with that understood, what does the rating do? And that's going to be the test. And so I'm recording this right now, a couple of hours after the show. So I want to kind of convey that. That's the number I'm interested in. I'm not interested in last week's number, even though obviously it ended up being very interesting. Do you maintain 1 million-ish viewers, or do you start to drop off from there and settle back down to your previous baseline from before? And that's the question I have going forward. Okay, so now, sorry for the long preamble. I needed to get some of those things out. Let me talk about AEW Dynamite, September 14, 2022. Okay, so coming into it, my curiosity was the follow-up, like I mentioned. More than anything, in all honesty, I don't think at this point, AEW, with the way it's structured and the questions that people have, I don't think you can bring anybody in that's going to pop a rating. I don't think you can do any specific one angle that's going to pop a rating unless that angle in question has some consistency to it. You need to know that week to week, this angle is going to keep developing. Now, there's a couple of pieces here that may be available to do that, but there were also a couple of cop-outs. So let's go through the episode here. Now, talking about it, going forward from this, the question that I had was, could you get 2 solid matches for the world title? You had 2 solid matches for the world title, and you had the uncertainty heading into Grand Slam. So I think, I mentioned a moment ago my prediction about this episode. It wouldn't surprise me if Grand Slam then picks it right back up, because you're going to have a little bit more intrigue. You're going to stack that card. you're going to no doubt stack it. So you can probably get a boosted rating because of that. But the question is, do you keep over 1 million? That's the question I have leading into it. So the show starts off with Sammy Guevara versus Jon Moxley. So this is one of the semifinals. The first one is the first semifinals heading into the finals, heading into Grand Slam. So you have Sammy Guevara versus Jon Moxley. A solid match. Obviously, Sammy Guevara is willing to kill himself in order to make the match work. It was a solid match. Solid. Interference from Ty Mello and Nana Jay. Initially, Ty Mello didn't come out with Sammy Guevara, which of course is the automatic lead into they'll interfere later. You telegraph that one pretty strongly. But the point is they interfered, Jon Moxley wins and advances with the Death Rider. Nothing crazy about that. You expect that. But you went to commercial break, came back, MJF comes out. Now, this was good. So the match was solid. No complaints from me about the match itself. Now, again, television matches, and I'll explain quickly my thought on television matches. We have television. So I don't mind having a decent television match. But for me, it's like the pay-per-view is where your money is. Really. The pay-per-view is where your money is. So as a result of that, I don't care for 20-minute television matches because at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of commercial breaks. Yeah, it could be a great match, but because of the commercial breaks, you break the flow anyway. So in reality, there could be some good television matches out there, but people won't remember them necessarily weeks and months in the future. So it's one of those things like you went through all that effort and all that trouble. And I'm not saying no, just to be clear. I'm not saying don't have a decent match on TV because, well, who cares? Obviously, the live crowd cares. Obviously, people do want to see some good matches on TV. And you don't want to be having squashes and 5-minute matches that then get broken up and, it turns into a schmoz and you have to lead into the pay-per-view. But the point is that having 20-minute matches necessarily all the time, it ruins their specialness, and it also means, realistically, what do you have to do then to make the pay-per-view match stand out? So that's one of those things that I think about when it comes to that. Now, in this case, it was fine. It was part of a tournament. We needed to do that. So Jon Moxley leaves after winning this match and advancing to the final. MJF comes out. Great. So we got a talking segment here with MJF. He comes out, insults Albany, makes sure that he's a heel full-fledged. Great. He touches on how he is different this time around from the last time he faced Jon Moxley. So kind of playing off their promo last week. Good. Some continuity from last week. Heaven forbid. But he's also thinking about the promo from last week, how he's not playing a character. He talks about Jon Moxley. He's talking about drinking problems, plays into it. A good, solid MJF promo. No doubt. No question. But here's where I kind of get, it kind of gets interesting from here. After addressing Jon Moxley and making clear that, he's going to be dealing with whoever the winner is of this tournament. Obviously, MJF sitting there waiting in wings to face off whoever the winner is of this tournament. Hopefully, it's Jon Moxley with the way they're setting this up, but whatever. So I expect it to be that, but whatever circumstance happens to be. So we get him introducing Stokely Hathaway. So what happens is he introduces Stokely Hathaway, sets him up, gives him a hug, gives him a handshake, and then takes off. And then Stokely Hathaway then gets to take over this promo, and we extend the promo segment. So this is unusual for AEW. They don't really have these elongated promo segments. In this case, it was fine, but it came to a kind of a weird result, and I'll explain what I mean. The MJF promo was fine, but then he leads on to Stokely Hathaway and kind of proverbially hands over the baton. So then Stokely Hathaway gets to kind of sit there and talk, and we do get a continuation from prior weeks explaining this faction that he's put together. But, and this is where I kind of had to chuckle. This is where Tony Khan kind of gets a little too cute for my taste. He's got Stokely Hathaway here. And he's got him with the whole stable. He's got W. Morrissey, he's got the Lee Moriarty, the Gun Club, and Ethan Page, and Stokely Hathaway coming out as being kind of the stable. And now Stokely Hathaway is going to finally explain this, this partnership, this amalgamation, this whatever it's going to be. Now, he grabs the microphone and he starts expanding on this whole idea, which is good. I wanted to get a little bit of additional clarification on this faction, what their intentions are and this whole bit. But the end result was, and this is a critique of Tony Khan. This is a bit of a deus ex machina kind of situation, in the sense that basically you're like, I'm just going to explain everything to you because I can't show you. And the reason I can't show you is because we don't have enough TV time. So I'm just going to have Stokely Hathaway sit there and literally just lay this out for you step by step, beat by beat, and just explain and explain and explain. And did I mention explain? My God, the amount of explanation and exposition required for this promo to work. So, to be clear, the stable in question is called The Firm, quotation marks, but they're a stable on retainer. Stable on retainer means that you have basically written in a cop-out for the fact that you're not going to see them as a stable week to week. You're going to, literally, Stokely Hathaway stated, indicates when MJF doesn't need them, they go their separate ways. Which is to say, we'll probably see Stokely Hathaway with Ethan Page. We'll probably see Stokely Hathaway with a couple of them hanging out. But he's not a manager. He's not an advocate. I'm adding advocate in there. But he mentioned a bunch of things he's not. And he's a friend. Great, fine. So, like, you sort of work with MJF-ish when he sort of needs you. But the rest of the time, you're just a bunch of individuals with a not manager-ish something. I'm not knocking the promo entirely because at least it established that maybe there's two things that we want to get into, and I'll touch on that in just a second. But the point is, like, this was like filling in the gaps all in the series of exposition. Just like, I'm just going to sit here with a microphone and just explain all this stuff that we're not going to be able to show you ever, but I'll explain it to you so hopefully you understand. If you listen to me, then you'll understand better, because otherwise you wouldn't understand, because it's just a random amalgamation of people who aren't going to be seen on screen necessarily, aside from this, and reasons. Not great, Tony. Not great, Tony Khan. So anyway, fine, whatever. He gave a basic outline of what everybody wants in the stable in question. It's a stable on retainer, so it's not really a stable, but it's there-ish-ness. So the end result was there were really only two people in that stable in the rundown that have a specific target. I guess three technically, but let's say two, for example. So Lee Moriarty, ROH Pure Championship. He references that. Okay, great. That, okay, Daniel Garcia, Lee Moriarty. That could be interesting. Sounds good. And then Ethan Page, All Atlantic Championship. Okay, Ethan Page and Pac. Okay, sounds good. So you've at least alluded to a potential series of feuds. Great. And then the Gun Club, AEW Tag Team Champions. Makes sense. At the same time, like, it's just kind of there. Fine, whatever. He literally just went down each person and laid out, quote unquote, what they want, even though they're not a stable, but they're sort of a stable-ish when the moment is right. Tony, don't overthink this. Don't over-explain this. Don't over-engineer this, but you kind of did. So fine, not terrible, not great. It's just kind of there. At least it's an explanation after a couple of weeks now. So we've got something. Fine. At least some potential title matches coming out of this. That's great. Otherwise, that was a really long promo segment, a little bit more WWE style, but I guess it was continuation. So, question mark, continuation. So I guess that's something. Fine. So there we go. Let's move on from there. Open contract challenge from Jungle Boy. It was answered by Jay Lethal. They had a match. Jungle Boy wins. I'm not going to go into the specifics of a lot of these matches, honestly, because again, and I want to be clear about this. It's not that I don't respect the matches, but on TV, like the matches, the way AEW structures themselves, the matches mean something, but they also don't mean something. It's one of those things where, like, the goal at the end of the day is to get to the quarterly pay-per-views and specials and, titles, but they've got so many titles that it kind of devalues a little bit of that. But at the same time, the matches can be really great, and this is maybe a topic for a separate video in question. But if you've got a lot of these long, drawn out, like, exciting matches, I'm not complaining, because at the end of the day, the paying crowd in the arena deserves to get some great wrestling. They're tuning in to AEW for great wrestling, and that's part of their brand, so they've got to provide that. But at the end of the day, if you got 15 to 20 minute matches on TV with commercial breaks, it's fine for the live crowd, not great for the television crowd, and at the end of the day, you're not going to remember it. It's not that you don't have good matches, it's that you'll have all these good matches, but with commercial breaks and stuff, it breaks the flow anyway. And even if you have this great television match, the amount of television matches that any of us, even those of us who have been fans of professional wrestling for a long time, can remember are finite. It's a very small list of television matches we can remember. The biggest matches we'll remember are going to be on pay-per-view with the biggest stakes and the biggest shows. So we're gonna remember WrestleMania 3 with Randy Macho Man Savage versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. We're going to remember that. Even though the match, wrestling-wise, wasn't great, we're going to remember the Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior in WrestleMania 6. We're going to remember that. We're going to remember the Hell in the Cell match where Mankind was thrown off the top of a Hell in the Cell by The Undertaker. Those moments happen, though, on pay-per-view. AEW is very good at having great pay-per-view moments as well, to be clear. But sometimes they obsess a little bit too much about, like, oh, let's have a classic match on TV. Cool, as long as you can do it commercial-free and actually play the match fully out. But because you have commercials, the match can never be fully experienced by the television audience the same way as it is with the live crowd. So it could be an amazing match for the live crowd, but we're not getting the full experience on TV, if you understand what I'm getting at. Again, that's just strictly my opinion. I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe don't worry and obsess about having classic matches on TV necessarily all the time. We can shoot for 8.5, 9 out of 10 matches on TV. That would be still great. That's a great standard. But don't worry about trying to get 10 out of 10 matches on TV, because you've got to save. Pay-per-view has to have some reason to exist. You want to charge people money to watch the pay-per-view? The 10 out of 10 matches had better be on there, where they're commercial free. That's just my opinion. That's just kind of my take on it. So anyway, Stokely Hathaway finished this promo with the whole thing with the firm. We'll see what happens with that going forward. Hopefully it leads to something. We'll see. I mentioned the open contract with Jungle Boy. Jay Lethal answered. Jungle Boy wins. It's just a vehicle to get us to the next matchup. Eventually, hopefully Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus, and then down the road, Jungle Boy and Christian Cage. We'll see what happens. It was fine to get Jungle Boy on there. Good stuff. He still got some momentum with the crowd, so that's good. Then we get into a very perplexing sequence of like promos, backstage segments. I'll explain. So first we've got Hook and Action Bronson in a training montage. Okay, look. Here's the thing. I don't have a problem with celebrity involvement. I'm glad that Hook is getting some feature. That's cool. I don't give a crap about Action Bronson. I really don't. Genuinely, I do not give a crap about Action Bronson. So having time on this show to feature a training montage with Action Bronson, I don't care. Now, it's going to be good for the live crowd, to be clear. It's going to be good for them. I didn't need a training montage promo with Action Bronson. I'm just being honest. I don't care about Action Bronson. Good for him. And I hope he does well, and I hope he takes it seriously, and I hope he's interested in engaging in it, and I'm glad for Hook. And all these things are good. These things are good. I appreciate it. I just didn't need it on the show where we've already crammed with so much stuff that it's like, we didn't need to waste valuable seconds on this. Then we follow it up. Like, I wrote this down in order. Like I said, I decided to sit down and watch the show and just make notes as things happened and as I observe them and give you my reaction to it. So I've got an Action Bronson and Hook training montage. Fine. Okay, next. Then I've got a segment of Luigi Primo introduced and kicked by Ethan Page and then interrupted by Danhausen. And now it's Ethan Page versus Danhausen on Rampage. My literal phrasing when I wrote this was, now it's Ethan Page versus Danhausen on Rampage, I guess. They did confirm that later on in the show. For reasons. The guys are friends. I'm sure they'll have a fine match, all things considered. But Danhausen is a little bit more of a comedy act, which, by the way, I appreciate him for that. I think it's fun. I think it's good. But at the same time, like, Ethan Page literally is now trying to establish himself inside of this new faction that is not a faction, a stable that is not a stable. I like Ethan Page. I think Ethan Page is great. I think he's awesome. I think he should be allowed to do something. And his first feud is with Danhausen on a Rampage pre-recorded episode. Why do I care? If Ethan Page is supposed to be taken seriously, we don't need him in Danhausen. Like, at the end of the day, fine, whatever. But, like, why? Like, honestly, why? This is one of the more perplexing decisions. We're trying to make Ethan Page take it more seriously, so we immediately throw him into a thing with Danhausen. I don't expect it to be a long thing, just to be clear. I'm not being ridiculous. I don't think it's going to be this long, drawn-out feud, but, like, at the same time, like, why? Why are we wasting our time with this? No more comedy. If Ethan Page is supposed to be taken seriously, they alluded to the All-Atlantic Championship. I don't need to have him face off against Danhausen as a lead-in to him hopefully facing off against Pac. Like, seriously. Whatever, fine, sure. And then after that, we follow up with another promo of Darby Allin doing some random stunt in a thing. Like, I honestly was watching it, and I still, for some reason, couldn't remember what it was. He did a thing where he jumped on like a bicycle or something, like whatever. The point is, it led into then a Matt Hardy promo, which then challenged him to a match. So it's Darby Allin versus Matt Hardy for reasons. Fine, sure. But this was 3 consecutive promos. We had the Action Bronson hook, the Luigi Primo, Ethan Page / Danhausen, and then Darby Allin and then Matt Hardy. 3 straight promos on this show. I'll come back to that in a moment. Next, Powerhouse Hobbs comes out for a squash match against a random jobber. I literally wrote this before the bell even rung. Killed him. Wrote this before the bell. Gives a promo. We want Ricky chant. Starts to move on in the promo. Ricky Starks comes out and attacks Hobbs. Okay. So I sort of understand it, but my initial thought was, why? Let me explain why. I ask why. The reason is because I understand the idea that we could have a feud between them. But the first match was under 5 minutes, referenced by Powerhouse Hobbs, and it was a clean finish. It was literally Powerhouse Hobbs, Ricky Starks, comes out, loses in a spine buster, in under 5 minutes, no interference, no foreign objects, no shenanigans, straight up, spine buster, 1, 2, 3. I understand the idea of wanting to keep a feud going on here, but it was pretty definitive. Why should Powerhouse Hobbs have to do a rematch with Ricky Starks? To be clear, my expectation, given this, would be that Ricky Starks somehow pulls off a victory for the second one, and then we have a rubber match. We have something to conclude it. But like, he won clean. He straight up beat the man. He hit him with the spine buster and won. I like Powerhouse Hobbs, and I like Ricky Starks. And I don't mind the idea of them feuding, but you kind of already wrecked that. Like, I actually don't see any reason why Hobbs should have to face Ricky Starks, other than we need to fill air times and we're going to do the match anyway. Fine, I guess. But, like, I don't like it for that reason. I want Powerhouse Hobbs to move on. I want Ricky Starks to do well. I want them both to do well. But in reality, because of the way you set it up on the pay-per-view, you then basically have to shoehorn in this match, and now we're going to continue this feud, even though the one guy won definitively clean in the middle of the ring. I don't like that. That's just my opinion, but I don't like that. But fine, I guess we'll do it. So be it. The match will be fine, but I have concerns about that. Next, Swerve in Our Glory versus Lucha Bros Tag Team Title match. This is where I would love to almost make a video about this, and maybe I will, talking about the Kenny Omega and Young Bucks thing. Look, it's going to be very bizarre right now with the Elite not being involved, given that they had won the Trios Championships and then immediately got stripped of the Trios Championship because of the whole circumstances leading into this. And now we've got Death Triangle having the Trios Championships, who will do very well. But we've got the Lucha Brothers, and we've got Swerve in Our Glory, and they had themselves a good, solid tag team match. And we've got FTR sitting on the sidelines. And we've got a bunch of other tag teams. We've got the Gun Club. We've got a bunch of other tag teams. We've got the Acclaimed, who are going to be facing Swerve in Our Glory, spoiler, for the tag team titles at Grand Slam. Obviously, I just explained to you what the match was. Swerve is doing a great job as a heel. Good action. Swerve and Keith Lee retain, setting up their matchup with the Acclaim. We knew this was going to happen. Like, the match was good. The point is that the AEW tag team division is strong. And this was what was funny to me, and I'll touch on this briefly right now. This is what was funny to me about the whole story, about the Young Bucks putting out feelers potentially for WWE. As independent contractors, and yes, they are independent contractors just like anybody else in the professional wrestling business, it makes all the sense in the world for them to explore all their options. Of course, they're going to pull out feelers. Does that mean they're going to end up in WWE? Not necessarily. Does that mean they won't end up in WWE? No, they could 100% end up in WWE. If Triple H wants them and wants to sign them and wants to offer them a good deal, why wouldn't they go? Take the money. I'm not going to knock you. The point is, the Young Bucks were off TV the last couple of weeks as a result, obviously. And they're going to be off TV for a little while. We'll see what happens in the long run. But the point is, I like the Young Bucks. I enjoy them. But guess what? The way AEW is structured right now with the tag team division of all things, I could snap my fingers and break both of the ACLs on both of the Young Bucks and put them out for a year, and you wouldn't notice. This isn't meant to be disrespect for the Young Bucks, but it is a testament to the depth of the tag team division of AEW. By contrast, WWE, if WWE got the Young Bucks tomorrow, it'd be great for them because at least they'd have another viable tag team other than the Usos and rando teams they throw together-ish. They don't have a tag team division in WWE. So the reason why I thought that whole story was interesting is, okay, for the sake of argument, let's say the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega can go to WWE. Oh my God, this is a huge thing, the EVP. From an optic standpoint, terrible, heinous, horrific. But it's almost like the Cody Rhodes thing all over again. And I don't want to rehash the whole bit, but I talked about it on the podcast. These guys are great at what they do, but they also take up a certain amount of oxygen on the show as a result of their relationship with Tony Khan previously and the way they were presented on the show. So if I take them off the show, all of a sudden I have more time for Swerve in Our Glory. All of a sudden I have more time for The Acclaimed. All of a sudden I have more time for FTR. All of a sudden I have more time for the Best Friends. All of a sudden I have more time for a variety of other tag teams that are available in the company. I actually have more than enough tag teams in AEW to have a great tag team division without the Young Bucks even being there. The Young Bucks are not a bad thing to have around. They're an asset. Kenny Omega is an asset, but they're no longer necessary the way they once were. AEW has arguably too many performers and not enough slots or airtime for all of them. So therefore, if I remove some of those folks, I suddenly have room for some of these other folks. I can have the Lucha Brothers featured. I can have FTR featured. I can have the Gun Club featured. I can have a variety of other tag teams available to me already who are there in the company who would do just fine. By the way, on this episode of Dynamite, I did not see the House of Black, which I understand Malachi Black's not around, but you've got a tag team there in Buddy Matthews and Brody King. That is a formidable tag team. Yes, you don't have the trios anymore. I understand Malachi Black's not around, but just to be clear, Buddy Matthews and Brody King are a potent tag team matchup. The point is, they've got tag teams. They've got tag teams available at the drop of a dime. Just snap your fingers. We've got a tag team. No problem. Don't even worry about it. No issues. No worries. We can throw a tag team out there. My apologies for the departure there. I needed to cover a little bit of ground, but let me continue. So, Swerve in Our Glory, Lucha Brothers, tag team match. Great match. Enjoyed it. Swerve is doing an amazing job as a heel. Good action. They're going to face off against The Acclaimed. Moving on. The Acclaimed comes out for a promo post-match. Good promo. Nothing crazy. But they set it up beautifully to have their match leading forward. And then Swerve and Keith Lee did their job. You know, they kind of stared at them disdainfully, held up the championships. Great. We're going to have that at Grand Slam. I'd be surprised if the Acclaims don't become champions. They've really got the support of the crowd. Great. All right, moving on. Backstage, Pac cuts a promo following the loss of the Lucha Brothers. So he basically is trying to state, hey, he's a double champion. Great. He gets hit off screen, and it was Orange Cassidy. Continues forward. I liked it, because from the perspective of Orange Cassidy, saying a couple of words there. He says he won't be a double champion for long. I like that. Just because Orange Cassidy is a bit more of a comedic character, and Pac's whole angle is that he's a comedic character. Therefore, he doesn't take him seriously, but he got him. He got him from the side, knocked him out there. All right, we're trying to set up a match down the road. Good. I like that. Now, moving on from that, again, there's a lot of miscellaneous stuff that was thrown on this specific episode of Dynamite had a lot of miscellaneous backstage promos, random crap thrown in there, which is not a terrible thing all the time, but it felt like it was a lot of stuff just shoehorned in to try to fit into 2 hours. Okay, this next match, though, I have an issue with. Let me explain what my issue is. So it was Britt Baker and Serena Deeb taking on Toni Storm and Athena. So now you got a tag team match, okay? So you got this tag team match. Fine. But prior to the match, they showed, again, the video that they had pre-recorded of Britt Baker trying briefly to engage with Jamie Hayter prior to her leaving the building, at All Out. They recorded it during All Out, and they did this whole bit last week and did this week. Again, continuity. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. However, here's my problem. And again, back to Tony Khan. And I'm trying to figure it out. Help me out with this. Tony Khan, do you actively hate the women's division? And I'm asking the extreme question because, You threw in this little brief promo with the one storyline with Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker, and then you immediately went straight to the one women's match on the damn show. And by the way, it was a decent match. It was Britt Baker and Serena Deeb versus Toni Storm and Athena. Solid, decent. No Jade Cargill on the show and nothing else. That was it. We threw this together. Good match. Good match. I want to be clear about this. And I made my notes. I like the match. But again, the promo was literally before. You couldn't even separate out. You couldn't put the promo in the first hour and the match in the second hour. Heaven forbid you should separate them a little bit to pretend that they're not just, okay, this is the segment where we acknowledge that we have women on the roster. This is it. That's it for the entire show. We'll go the whole show. We'll do this one block, and then we'll never acknowledge women before or after again. At the end of the day, do what you want, but I'm just saying, like, you're ignoring a whole demographic that you could be appealing to if you were willing to have multiple running storylines. And I've got another issue with this match as well. But the first issue I've got is that you combine the promo with the match immediately back to back and just literally shoehorned the entire reference to the entire women's division in that one seg block and then ignored everything else. Fine. So we've got the match. You can separate out the two segments, but fine. Toni Storm also got to at least say something in a promo, so that's nice. She's already ahead of Thunder Rosa in that regard. She got to say words, consecutive words on a promo, so that's nice. Okay, so they have this match. So here we rolled in. They also acknowledged the rift between Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter. Awesome, good stuff. So it's not all negative, but just to be clear, like, I've got some issues, and I'm going to explain some more issues here. Next, I wrote down a note. Random interesting notes. Serena Deeb is 22-2 record in AEW in 2022. Seems to me like she should be competing for some kind of title, but never mind, I guess. Okay, so she's tagging with Britt Baker. Great. The announcers mentioned and played up Britt Baker not having talked to Jamie Hayter since the backstage pre-record following the All Out pay-per-view. Good stuff. Good on the announcers. Some continuity between one episode and another. So here's the way I put my notes. Good news and bad news. The good news is another good feature for the interim women's champion actually being on the show. Shout out Thunder Rosa. Actually being on the show. Decent match. Solid. I like it. But it's still missing some legitimacy. It's still missing some separation, by the way. Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker is one storyline. The AEW Women's Championship is potentially another storyline. By the way, you've also got the TBS Championship. Heaven forbid we even reference it, but we didn't. So fine. But what you did is you shoehorned the only two potential segments you've got going on. Because right now, Jade Cargill doesn't have an opponent of any kind. And the AEW Women's Interim Champion doesn't have an opponent per se. So fine. And I'll mention that again in a second. But you've got the champion, and then you've got Baker and potentially Jamie Hayter all shoehorned into one match. Because she's teaming with Serena Deeb, because Jamie Hayter wasn't available, because they're not talking, etc., etc. Fine. The match was fine. My issue was with the ending. The ending of the match was Britt Baker throwing Athena into the stairs. Great. And then using interference in a chair to basically have Serena Deeb throw Toni Storm into a chair and then pin her for the win of the tag team. Great. Okay, here's your problem. Toni Storm literally is named as interim women's AEW champion, which I understand that's what AEW has established, the interim championship, whatever. You cannot have the champion taking a pin on TV this way. I understood it was Britt Baker being underhanded and shady and all that, and Serena Deeb being underhanded and shady and all that. But the fact that you amalgamated the only two potential angles you got, and I'm going to get into the rest of it in a second, the other angle. But the point is, you've got the AEW Women's Interim Champion, who needs to be booked strong, heaven forbid, leading into hopefully a feud down the road. She doesn't have a feud coming out of this, per se. So you've got, the only thing you had was, she's got the championship, and Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker have an issue. So instead, you shove them all into one segment, and as a result of that, she outsmarted it to win. Great. Use the chair to give Serena Deeb the pinfall and the women's champion. Not the best idea in my opinion. Fine. Okay, great. but you also stuff the two storylines you've got with the women together into one because we can't afford another segment for this. But then Hayter makes a run-in post-match after the match is won and the heels have won. Jamie Hayter makes a run-in. She takes the chair from Britt Baker. It looks like she's about to do something. We're going to see what happens. She hits Toni Storm with the chair post-match. And then she gives a stare down to Britt Baker. Britt Baker says, I apologize, this whole thing. So the storyline of Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker takes precedence over the AEW Interim Women's Champion, Toni Storm, who has the belt, but doesn't have a feud per se, and was kind of a pawn in this whole bit because Jamie Hayter hit her, but then also stared at Britt Baker. She wasn't even focused on Toni Storm. And again, I'll emphasize why this is even made worse in about a second. But the point is, so you've got this. Toni Storm is secondary. The title is secondary. Jamie Hayter's mad at Britt Baker. Britt Baker is trying to apologize to Jamie Hayter. That's going on. But you shoehorned into the AEW Interim Women's Championship, which is then going to get a match at Grand Slam, which doesn't make sense in a second. I don't like the AEW Women's Champion be used as a pawn in the building feud between Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker. Not good. So Toni Storm took the pin and was also cast as an afterthought because apparently no one cares about the women's champion. They're just, these two are mad at each other, but it was used as a plot device. Not great. Not a fan. Then a promo airs for AEW Grand Slam, and the promo includes a four-way match for the AEW Women's Championship. Remember what I said a second ago? 1 second ago. A moment ago, the Jamie Hayter had hit Toni Storm with a chair after taking the chair from Britt Baker, who was about to hit Toni Storm with the chair to make a point. So they've got kind of their own thing going on. But at the same time, the four-way is Toni Storm versus Serena Deeb, who was in this match a second ago and pinned Toni Storm, versus Athena, who was Toni Storm's tag team partner, versus Britt Baker, who has this ongoing issue with Jamie Hayter. That's the four-way match for Grand Slam for the AEW Women's Championship. Why wouldn't Jamie Hayter be involved in this in some way? Doesn't mean you can't do something after the fact, but the point is, that doesn't make any sense. It's half-assed. That's why it leads me to the whole question. Is so does Tony Khan literally not give a crap about the women's division aside from Britt Baker? And again, I like Britt Baker. I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. But the reality of it is that there's a way to use that character. Britt Baker is probably the best developed character that they have on the women's roster. You can use that character to good effect to the benefit of everyone, as opposed to you just gave Toni Storm this title, had her have a match, not really have a coronation. Fine, it's an interim championship. But at the same time, you have her out in this match and you have her take the pin. I like Athena too. To be clear, I like all the women in this match and Jamie Hayter as well. So I like them all. But in this case, Athena takes the pin in my mind. Why would you not have Athena take the... You don't have your champion pinned, while at the same time then suddenly they don't care about the pin anymore because now they're focusing on a separate issue. That's not great. That's very similar in certain ways to what they did with Thunder Rosa, which undermined her entire championship reign. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm never going to be a fan of that. That's just my take and my opinion. But anyway, okay. So now we're at the main event. We're at the end of the show here. Chris Jericho versus Bryan Danielson. Good, solid main event. Lots of star power from that perspective. Good, solid match. But at the end of the day, Danielson wins, setting up a match with Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley comes out. He faces Danielson. They shake hands. And now it's going to be the Blackpool Combat Club taking on each other in the finals. And the winner has MJF sitting in the wings. We'll see what happens with that. Solid finish to the show. What I'll say overall is that it was a bit of a mixed bag. It was a decent show, but you notice how long I took kind of complaining about the whole women's division thing? And maybe your question would be well, why do you even care them? Because to me, a good wrestling show has a nice balance. And right now it still feels like AEW is still out of balance. And I'll give you a different example. Forget about the women's division. You don't care about the women's division? No problem. I'll give you a different reason why I say stuff is out of balance. Okay. Last week, on the very same Dynamite show, on the very same show, you had Wardlow come out, do this match, and then have a promo where he talked about, being more of a feature, being more of a focus, basically being like, has he lost a step, whatever. He did that. There was no follow-up on Dynamite this week. None. Wardlow was not on the show. FTR is not on the show. There's a variety of different people that can be featured one week and then forgotten the next. The reason why I was happy, to a certain degree, that Toni Storm was in the tag team match at all was at least the AEW Interim Women's Championship was on the show twice in a row. That's good. But at the same time, she took a pin in a non-title thing in a tag team match as a plot device for a separate angle. Not good. Like I said, there are elements that are good. The world title tournament has been solid so far, and it's leading to it's going to be a fun matchup here coming up at Grand Slam next week. It's going to be Jon Moxley versus Bryan Danielson. That match is going to be fun. I think the crowd's going to enjoy it. It's going to be good. It's not like there's nothing good on the show, but there are these weird decisions that you do during the very same show. You'll have the thing where MJF comes out, cuts a decent promo. Good. Stokely Hathaway comes out and cuts like a weird promo for a stable that's not a stable. It's on a retainer. It sort of shows up sometimes, not at other times. We give people different potential paths. Ethan Page is on the show. Good. But then Ethan Page is suddenly slotted into a match with Danhausen. Not good. Not because I don't like Danhausen. I like Danhausen in certain situations. But if we're suddenly taking a more serious approach to Ethan Page, Danhausen doesn't make any sense. It's a waste of time. Why is he facing off against Danhausen when if you supposedly want the All-Atlantic Championship, you probably should be focusing on somebody else? At the same time, though, I can't blame them because they already set up that you're going to have a brief matchup and feud with Orange Cassidy and Pac. So Ethan Page wants the All-Atlantic Championship, but doesn't have a direct path to the All-Atlantic Championship because suddenly he's focused on Danhausen for a moment to delay him and to stall him while we have an Orange Cassidy-Pac match, which, by the way, should be really good. But at the same time, it's like, so we've literally alluded to this other thing, but we're not going to get to it this week. We're not going to get to it next week. We're not going to get to it probably the week after. Like, it's going to take a while. We're going to have a match with Orange Cassidy and Pac, which is going to be solid. And then I guess the winner of that will face Ethan Page, hopefully, in the not-too-distant future, but we don't know that for sure. The point is you keep alluding to these things and then, like, sort of delivering half of it. You gave Toni Storm a championship here. You gave her a title reign. So great. You had her get pinned in her second match after winning the damn title. I'm not a fan of that. That's not great. A lot of little things. Again, AEW right now is in a position. That's why I said this rating is going to be very interesting to me. Because the last show was solid. Solid. Not perfect, but solid. You didn't carry over Wardlow. You didn't carry over some of the other thoughts. You kind of half-assed kind of this Deus Ex Machina explanation for this faction that had been accumulated to help MJF, which then helps MJF when he feels like it, which is not all the time, but it's sometimes, but not all the time. And then you gave yourself an out. Stokely Hathaway basically gave Tony Khan a storyline out for why this faction would not appear on TV on a regular basis. It's like, well, when MJF doesn't need us, we'll go our separate ways. Okay, great. So why are you a faction in the first place? And this is something that AEW has done that they've struggled with for factions. Same thing with the Pinnacle previously under MJF also. And even the Jericho Appreciation Society. They'll build this faction, but this faction only sometimes hangs out. The Blackpool Combat Club is technically a faction, but the guys are like almost never out there at the same time. Claudio Castagnoli is doing his own thing most of the time. You know, Wheeler Yuta is doing his own thing most of the time. Bryan Danielson is doing his thing most of the time. Jon Moxley is doing things most of the time. The only common denominator is William Regal. And only sometimes. And he's on commentary. He's not really backing them up, ringside. So he's on commentary just kind of observing. And by the way, I don't have an issue with William Regal being on commentary. That's fine. But at the same time, it's like, factions are weird in AEW. And I want to make sure I present this correctly. I am a fan of AEW. I appreciate an alternative to WWE's product because I'm still not a fan of WWE's product. And I've outlined various reasons, and I may touch on them again down the road. But the point is that I want a good alternative, but Tony Khan does some weird stuff that he just can't seem to help himself with. And my goodness, does he need some delegation. That women's division needs some TLC, for goodness sake. It needs someone to sit there and actually devote some time to it and actually think about it and not just shoehorn the only 2 segments on the damn show into one brief kind of mini segment, one match and one promo, ignore it the rest of the time, and shoehorn everything else in. If we've got time for Action Bronson, we have time for another women's promo. And if you don't want to do that, fine. Then give me a promo or a talking segment or something that involves your TBS championship. Sorry, your TNT champion. Wardlow should have been on the show in some capacity this week to follow up last week. Why did we suddenly ignore Wardlow? That's the part I don't get. You referenced him in a different promo, fine, but it's not the same. If you're trying to build him up to be a star, he doesn't have to be on every week, but at least make sure he's at least discussed in some manner other than kind of in an offshoot of a promo. That's the part that I don't like. That's the part that I'm a little weird on. But anyway, that's just kind of my opinion on it. Overall, it was a decent show of Dynamite. Not perfect. Obviously, there were some flaws and some warts from my perspective. But, not a bad show. It's one of those things where, I'll be interested to see how the audience reacts to it. I'll be interested to see how the ratings react to it. My expectation would be a decline from last week. Still a decent rating. And hopefully Grand Slam picks up on it next week. And then you get a bit of a boost. But again, now you're going to have a new AEW champion. So, hopefully, that leads into some new storylines, some new feuds, and some new ideas going forward after you actually award the championship. And then, I guess, presumably MJF waiting in the wings, and then we'll see what happens from there. That's really the most important piece. You had a little bit of momentum. You've been going okay. The fallout from All Out wasn't nearly as good as it could have been, even with all the buzz and the questions and everything. So, how do you move forward? My opinion is you're not going to be able to hotshot this. You're not going to be able to do one thing and expect suddenly a rating spike. You want the ratings to go up long term, you're going to have to be more consistent. And even this week, there were some missing elements of consistency, some other pieces that did fall into place well. So I did enjoy that. But like I said, it was a bit of a mixed bag. Overall, a positive, I think, but barely. I'm going to put it in the barely positive category. That'd be my opinion on that. Okay, so that's it for me. Sorry, I had to go through a lot of different stuff trying to talk through that whole Dynamite episode, kind of my thoughts on it. I'd be curious to get what your thoughts are on the show itself. Did you like the show? Did you feel like it advanced certain storylines forward? Did you feel like it was a bit of a cop-out with the Stokely Hathaway thing? How are you feeling about some of the bigger angles as far as the show is concerned? I'd be interested to get your take on it. So hopefully you can put that in the comments section. Otherwise, hopefully you got something out of it. I appreciate you listening. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more videos upcoming on different episodes and different things coming up forward. I'm looking forward to see how things develop. Again, I'm still cautiously optimistic, and I have to see what they do going forward. But, I do have some concerns. So I want to try to be as transparent with you as possible and at least outline what some of those concerns are. Anyway, so that's it for me for now. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.